For a series like Animator vs. Animation to work, you need a compelling emotional anchor that bleeds into raw fighting capabilities mixed with the sheer spectacle. And today, I'm going to be breaking down the very stick figure that started off as a short introduction to what was supposed to actually be just a trilogy. It's time to dissect the fighting style of a stick figure that never wanted to fight. Who would have loved a quiet life just studying technology instead of returning to a path of retribution? Welcome to How Strong Are Alan Becker's Stick Figures, a series dedicated to breaking down a character's fighting style from their maneuvers to their tools to their mental faculties. But I'm also interested in why they fight and what aspects of their character are highlighted by their combat sense. And today, we're breaking down Victim, whose entire fighting purpose isn't just made to be the happy-go-lucky fighting series, but instead one fueled with unbridled emotions of grief, rage, and loss. I broke down the Rocket Corps mercenaries on our previous video, so now we're continuing with the man behind the plan. Disclaimer, this isn't your average power scaling style of video where I'm taking in strength in isolation, and I also won't be putting numbers for the sake of proving superiority amongst characters. It's a dissection, where I'm using the scenes and the context of their personality to better understand why they fight a certain way. Also, it's not completely power that I'm after either. It's appreciating what the character can do and which aspect of their story is best reflected in their combat arsenal. So, let's begin. Victim was the first ever stick figure featured in the Alan Becker series 20 years ago. But unlike the fun, powerful dynamism that would cement the series' core style in the future iterations, Victim's simplistic nature, because he was Alan's starter animations, actually complemented the future fighting style themes that he'd have in the future. Namely, Victim's fighting style is defined by survival. He doesn't carry that innate power like the Chosen One and the Dark Lord, or that sense of community that fostered a love for combat like the Second Coming. When he began fighting Alan, it's noticeably just environment-centric, throwing the lines and dots drawn at the cursor, and using more haphazard lunges to latch on or throw things at Alan. Notably, he doesn't show his own mechanics like kicking or punching all that much, instead relying on what's happening in the program as his weapon. But it's also important to respect that Animator vs. Animation's storyline is 2 decades old. Not only did this develop from a funny-looking animation to having actual story stakes, it also improved in animation and combat direction. For a more holistic look, we need to look at the newer versions of Victim. Physically, Victim is a regular stick figure, with higher than average acrobatic capabilities. Most of his non-empowered combat feats include climbing and general evasion. He knows how to punch and kick, but it's more so out of emotion instead of tactical strategy. We see a vague, unlabeled snapshot of his general stats, and assuming that they haven't been tampered with yet, they're pretty average, which makes sense. Victim was never made to be a fighter, so the intent of creation never bled into latent abilities. Victim's fighting style is also complemented by meta-reality manipulation, and that's a constant theme throughout his story. Victim is the stick figure in the series with the highest form of awareness of not only his creator, but also his physiology and anatomy as an animation, even more so than the Second Coming, who is an animator himself. Of course, the Color Gang are aware of it too, considering they're friends with Alan, but Victim's story more so challenges and weaponizes the actual mechanics of the tools instead of what they represent. The Second Coming represents the animator's heart and life, but Victim represents the methods. An example of this is how he doesn't draw a bow, he creates a bow with the line tools and the brush. Victim's extent of drawing is actually limited to terrain building, the only exception to this rule being himself. Or rather, clones of himself. And even then, he never actually truly draws the way that the Second Coming does. But what Victim is strongest in is in his knowledge of how the world works as an animation. I don't think people give Victim enough credit for how absolutely mind-bending that is. To an untrained stick, the outer net is all they've ever known. Maybe Newgrounds as an extension. Even the Color Gang, except Orange, were blissfully unaware of their larger existence as programs until Alan showed them more. Victim knowing that they're stick figures and how to actually manipulate reality by, I don't know, casually just erasing matter from existence and creating new ones, is nothing short of a deity's ability. The box in AVA-10 is designed, most likely by him, to emulate our drawing tools because he knows they're all just drawings. The select tool for the Chosen One's fire, and for the individual parts of Victim's body boosting his abilities and even opacity, or the different symbol names at the side where you can even see Victim. I'm going to be diving into this a little later because Hacker uses this kind of concept very well. But let's move on to their weapons. Victim and his clones have a rudimentary understanding of weapons based on their original animation: shuriken, sword, hammer, whip, lasso. But to say that he's proficient in these weapons the same way that the Color Gang are during AVA9 would be way too generous. It's almost as if he has a vague idea of these weapons based on experience. But because he doesn't have the combat knowledge back then, he can't use them beyond swinging and throwing. This is in direct contrast to actual masters of the same weapons in the series. Actually, Victim's most used and mastered weapon is the lasso, which is thematically appropriate given his time as a captive. It's a symbolic tool that's about capture and restrain. This does seem to be remedied in AVA13 though, where Victim becomes more lethal with the weapons, especially the sword and, again, the lasso. Additionally, Victim's core themes in his fighting style are more dualistic, represented in how he's both the leader of Rocket Corps, who is a cold, technologically obsessed savant and innovator, and how he's the grieving abused who wasn't just broken for years by a vile creator, but was also robbed of what little happiness he made himself. His planning skills and tech, such as how he planned to trick Alan into renaming him and how he created the box as a prison, represents the first. And his inclination to anger and rage because of all of this bottled up hatred is represented by his big and almost reckless attacks. And this is where we move on to Hacker. When Victim becomes Hacker, we see him gain an immense increase to his strength and speed, being able to move lightning fast towards enemies. He has a type of weightlessness that makes him so agile, kind of symbolic considering that he was always weighed down by the fact that he was a prisoner. I also like that he's able to fly now, so good for him. Hacker's fighting style is fast and bold, overwhelming your enemies as much as possible with a rapidly changing flurry of strikes. However, what makes him dangerous is his meta-knowledge. Hacker's meta-knowledge of all the properties of a particular data entity is one of my favorite abilities in all of fiction because it's such a cool way to show layers of information in world building. So here's an example. When a system of reality exists, it's usually written as though it only has one layer of existence. Even magic systems for fantasy worlds don't cross that boundaries all that much. It's still confined in the logic of their reality. The Chosen One's power set is a great way to represent this. The elements only move, exist, and affect in the context of the stick figure's realm of reality. The next layer of reality is similar to the Second Coming's power set of revivals being connected to them being programs. It's still grounded on the inner world's logic, but it bridges a concept that's much higher than the world that they exist in, aka that they're computer programs and drawings being brought back to life. But Hacker's powers move on to the highest level of possible reality. The fact that they're all data points in a computer. They aren't real to us or to Alan. They're not even tangible. I find that so cool from a storytelling perspective because it challenges the fourth wall. He's not just breaking reality, he's weaponizing the very things that make them real to us. This is the logic that helps him gain the Hacker powers and remove Chosen's powers in the first place. The fact that the Chosen One was named as a symbol in a program as the Chosen One. It's time to actually see what those powers mean. We see the depth of his knowledge with the visor. Alan's cursor menu shows class, which is probably the data attribute, and the fact that the user access is compromised because Hacker is using him. An attack vector, or a threat vector, is the path for attackers to enter the system. I like how the path here was phishing, which is a form of attack that deceives users to giving unsolicited communication or information or installing malware without them knowing. So, fake yellow. Active CTX probably means active context. According to Stack Overflow, it refers to the environment in which a code operates, sometimes the parameters or the object used to define how or why the system is running that way. So it could be referring to the fact that Alan's cursor is being compromised by the tool lasso. Hacker can also see specific components and compositions of items and people. So for the building, it has the building materials and components, while for the satellite, it defines the transmit and receive. Hacker can also see their true name, especially since he has the knowledge of how people are named. But what I love about this is that he can see their powers and the code inside of them. Hacker can also operate in universe computers, such as broadcasting or storing data. Data that includes the program's history and usage. Weirdly enough, when he scans Mitzi, he has an extended level of statistics that are included. We can see that Mitzi has stats similar to an RPG. Also, strangely enough, we can see MP, attack, defense, and other things on her. Besides the obvious out-of-universe stylistic choices, and it being cool that there are a lot of interfaces, is there a reason in-universe why the interfaces between the stick figures are different? Hacker can also select things in this world like a user, floating and moving them around. He also has an integrated Animator's tool with him, which I really like considering that he was the original user. He can generate blocks and barriers with the shape tool similar to Agent. His true strength is being able to control multiple structures and pieces at once to throw at an enemy. Hacker also has the ability to corrupt entire systems, changing Alan's PC back to an older version for effect. Hacker can also disable internal systems like Cortana and Alan's firewall. He can also manipulate the actual windows like the right-click menu. Hacker's main offensive style is generation. He conjures a volley of swords, a hammer, 10 shurikens, and his lasso, which he can enlarge like an actual selection. In EVE 13, he also extends the sword like when you extend the drawing. The speed of Hacker's generation is what makes him formidable, and the sheer magnitude of his power easily makes him one of the strongest fighters on the field. Hacker can also clone himself for extra efficiency. What makes Hacker's power set so cool is that it is an extension of his technology side, amplified by tenfold. The amount of control he has to levitate and attach individual items is insane, but we do know that it takes a horrible amount of his power, and he isn't completely used to it yet. Even the actual product itself seems mildly disorganized despite functioning properly. We also know that with the Hacker powers, he's able to conjure an army of himself, but the speed of his control isn't consistent enough to actually move all of them intelligently at once or even intricately besides certain swings. Most likely because of an out-of-universe reason of shot complexity and composition. You don't want too many things on the board. No doubt about that, but also because controlling that many all at once would probably overload him. Notice how in the fight against the Dark Lord, even attacks that look like combos are actually 3 separate clones chaining their attacks. Meanwhile, Hacker is blinking in and out of existence, trying to get a quick hit. Hacker can also send powerful bursts of cyan binary energy to destroy, manifesting as lightning jolts towards someone. His first style of attacking with them is through smaller bullets, amplified by his speed, before enhancing his own attacks with them, delivering wide shockwaves. Hacker's attacks are grand and bold, but the actual technique that comes with these attacks are lost on him. He doesn't have the complete experience, and will soon realize that he's heavily punished for it. Hacker's actual personality is what's carrying the use of the power. He's good at adapting to new situations because of his background. But even if he has the fundamentals in place, that doesn't mean that he has the deeper experience needed. Compared this to the Dark Lord, Victim is almost either on the wrathful offensive or on a hasty retreat. But the way that he fights the Dark Lord is almost as if he's never truly in control of which state he'll be in. Victim's use is too messy and reactive. If one thing didn't work, surely another thing will. Him turning off Dark's powers was a response instead of an attack. When he levels the ground, he tries to block the entire area away from the Dark Lord, but that's what causes him to overexert the rest of his power. Actually, now that I think about it, had he been more confident in his combat capabilities, we actually might have seen more hand-to-hand combat. But by the end of it, I think that Victim already knew that he was outclassed. I think his defeat here against the Dark Lord is something that's very thematic when it comes to the Alan Becker fighting series. It's that it isn't just about spectacle or power, but a user's experience and comfort in using it, as well as the limitations of emotions. Characters are either amplified beyond their limitations or crippled by their lack of control. Victim is not an exception to this rule, especially since his love for Mitzi was the driving catalyst not only for his blind anger for the Dark Lord, but also for everything else that he has done. Everything that he did to pursue the Chosen One was a lie. He believed someone who ended up destroying everything he, an agent, worked so hard for. That level of heightened emotional instability was all the Dark Lord needed to finish what he started. Flaws like that in a series like this, where combat nuances are so respected, are what keeps you a hair between staying alive and, well, not. Overall, I really had fun analyzing Victim because he has a lot more story weaved into the way that he fights. Victim's storytelling responsibility was never actually to be a powerhouse. Rocket Corps wasn't meant to be an organization of power in the first place. It was a tech company meant to help and build for the people. Ultimately, Victim became the victim of his own grief. A sad but very interesting circle. I'm Mushi, and that has been How Strong is Victim?